Welcome everyone to the event on the historical memory of the 90s transformations through the lens of education, hosted by the Open Lithuania Foundation. This discussion aims to explore multiple perspectives of the transition memory from various field experts, as well as background experiences, and reflect on the challenges of teaching transition period at school. Also, one of the discussion participants will share the initial results of the project Transition Dialogue 2019-2021, dealing with change in democratic ways. Preliminary insights on the most common difficulties in teaching about the transition period, and discuss the teacher's role as well as competencies required to overcome those difficulties. Let me introduce our guest speakers. Mr. Donatas Puslys, a journalist, teacher, a head of media program at Vilnius Institute for Policy Analysis in Lithuania, Mr. Juozas Malickas, a former teacher of several different schools in the US and currently a teacher at the North Lyceum in Vilnius, Lithuania as well, and Ms. Luisa Slavkova, director of the Sofia Platform Foundation in Bulgaria, a representative of the project Transition Dialogue. I will moderate our discussion. My name is Vaidotas Stepanavicius. I am a teacher at Vilnius International School. Those who are listening to us are welcome to suggest questions on a chat window that we may address either during the discussion or by the end of it. Let's begin from a quick question to all the participants. Transition period in our discussion is a conversion from one state of political and socioeconomic system to another, from totalitarianism to democracy, although sometimes, as history teaches us, it can happen the opposite way. Could you please reflect very briefly from your own perspectives on where do you think your homeland is right now in that transitional period, and what signals may suggest that? May I ask for Donatas to start?
Thank you. Yeah, I was hoping that someone else will start because it's a really hard question, and the comparison comes into my mind when two people look at the glass with water, and one of them says that it's half full, the other one says it's half empty. So one is an optimist, the other one is pessimist. So I would be more on the side of an optimist, but I would say that, yeah, we managed to achieve great things, and it is quite obvious we are named as a consolidated democracy, but on the other hand, we face real challenges. And I think it would be wise to imagine state like a house. And then I would say that if it is a house, then the structure of the house consists of various state institutions, free and fair election, all the other attributes that the viable democracy needs. But then there is the tenants of the house. So that's us. And on us depends how this house looks like. Do we take care of it, or do we even clean it, or so on? So I mean, the quality of democracy depends on the quality of civil society, and I think that's too often overlooked, because we tend to concentrate on those political, economical issues related to the state, but it's very important to stress this. And I think that's the main challenge now, to work on strengthening the civil society and making people believe that their voice is heard, and actually they have a responsibility towards maintaining democracy, because yeah, that's the main issue, I think. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It is really interesting to compare with similar background country, Bulgaria. Luisa, could you reflect on that question briefly?
Of course. So thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation, and I hope this conversation is relevant and interesting for whoever felt like joining today. I am tempted to answer the question as a political scientist, and we kind of tend to focus very much on institutions, or some of us at least. So generally, a political scientist will tell you that transition within Europe is done when a country joins the European Union. This is the marker that tells you that the democracy is consolidated, something that also Donatas talked about. But the problem when you focus only on institutions, so like state institutions, elections, the media, legislation, party system, multi-party, a parliament, etc. The problem with focusing on all the institutions of democracy is that you don't look that much at the people. So I am kind of seconding what Donata said in a way, but I think what happened in our region is to very quickly say that transition is over because we looked at the institutions, but we didn't look so much at the political culture of people. So when you look across the region at different value surveys, like the European Value Survey, for example, but I can imagine that locally done representative studies show the same thing. We're kind of on when it comes to our values and attitudes and dispositions, we're kind of a hodgepodge between what people used to be under communism and what the attitudes and values and people should be in a democracy. So we kind of want democracy, but at the same time, we're ready to trade off rights for more state care. So we would like to have a strong hand, a strong state that is really catering to us, but would be ready to trade off some of our rights. So I think in that respect, I would say institutionally transition is over in the region, more or less. Of course, depending on where you put the borders of the region. So if we look at the countries that are part of the Eastern Partnership, I would not necessarily say so. So more or less, democracy is consolidated, and we've joined the European Union, so transition was over. But once a democracy is consolidated, this doesn't mean that it cannot deconsolidate. And this is what has been happening in the past couple of years. And I think this is something else that we should look at separately from transition/transformation.
Right, so it's not like given, right? You need to secure it. Also, very interesting to hear, Mr. Juozas, since you spend a lot of time in the United States and you moved to Lithuania from, we can say, purely democratic. I mean, there are no perhaps 100% democracies. There's always space to work on that, right? But how do you see, where is Lithuania right now in that transition period? Are we, can we say that we are completely at the finish line here, like at least transitioning from the Soviet Union?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to including me. And what I can say, I see myself as an immigrant again. When I moved to the United States, I was immigrant. I have to adapt. I have to learn new ways. I have to learn the language, meet people, make connections. And now when I move back 20 years later, I feel the same way. Just the only one difference is I speak the same language. I know my language is different. Even Lithuanian language is different because the language develops, the language moves. And people who know me now, they say, you speak a little bit different. I'm using some word from that time, they say, we don't say that anymore, or we don't say it this way anymore. So I feel a little bit like, again, in the air. And what I can say, comparing to the United States of America, I would say Lithuania in a stage, we ending the start. We only ending the start of the path. We're not in the middle, we're not in the end. We started, and now we're ending that starting period. Because when you compare how Americans act, how they express their opinions, how they participate in national elections, how they participate in debates, it's a clear distinguish that Lithuanians are too shy and they still rely too much on the government. Real democracy, not the government rules you, but you give the government the idea how you want to live, and they find the best way how to make that idea real. So Lithuania and especially even my friends, they say, I'm expressing too much, I'm criticizing too much the government, I'm raising my voice too loud, I'm speaking too much. They're not used to that. People have ideas, even if I'm not a politician, I'm just a teacher, I'm just a citizen, that I have an idea how this or another problem can be solved. And it doesn't mean I'm imposing my idea, but I'm expressing that idea, I'm sharing, and I would like my idea to be heard. And sometimes I would say Lithuanians, don't take offense, that they think I'm kind of cocky. Like, who are you to say? Are you a politician? Are you a professor? I said, no, but it doesn't mean I have to stay quiet. It doesn't mean I have to agree when I disagree. So that's why I say we only ending the start, because we as a society, we have to be more involved. When I say we as a society, I mean every single citizen. We have to be active. Like, I totally agree with Luisa. Democracy is a process. It's not a done and done. It's a journey, and you have to work it out every single day, every single month. It's not like a gift. You give it and you have it. I totally agree. So, and we have to educate ourselves, and we have to encourage people not to be shy. We have to learn to be modest. We have to learn to respect when we hear some opinions which are totally opposite. And we have to learn to disagree and not to be enemies because we disagree. So that's how I see that process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. So let's start the major guiding questions that we'd like to share with our listeners. And I'll start again from Mr. Donatas. A few questions for you, while Ms. Luisa and Mr. Juozas are welcome to comment afterwards as well. So, transition period from a time perspective. What impact our memories on 90s may have on our democracy today? It's a big question, I know, but could you reflect on that?
Thank you, Vaidotas. Yes, it's really a big question, and in 10 minutes to answer it, I would love to. Actually, then it would be easy to live. Like in 10 minutes, you find all the answers, and then you don't have to worry about them anymore. I would like to start from a quotation from a book that I just recently finished. It's a book by my beloved Polish author Wiesław Myśliwski, and in it the old historian, a professor, tells important sentence. He says that history is never about the past. Doesn't matter how distant it is. It always happens now when we are living, because only history helps us to find our place in the map of time. So actually, yeah, analyzing history, and especially analyzing the way how people tell the story of a transition, helps to understand their moods, their dissatisfactions, their hopes, and everything what's related with not only with the time which is already past, but also with the contemporary state and how they evaluate democracy, how they evaluate the state of civil society, and so on. And it's especially important to analyze not only, like, let's say, historical books or school textbooks and etc., but myths and mythologies that the people have, because they reflect certain patterns about golden age, for example, which you had or hadn't in a history, about their relation with the power. It's like strong hand versus like democracy and involvement, and etc. So it is very important, and I would like to proceed with the questions, because I was thinking about the comparison in the context of the school, because we are also speaking about how do we teach transitional period in the schools. So there is a comparison when a person asks why Jewish educational system is so successful. So they have a lot of Nobel Prize winners and really clever guys, and what's the difference between their and a traditional educational system, which, for example, I was part of. In a traditional system, you go back home and you are being asked, so what grades did you get? 8, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 or something. And like I used to tell, for example, yeah, I got 6, but all my classmates got like 4, 3 or something. So I'm better, because you always compare with someone. In a Jewish educational system, they say when you get back home, you are not being asked about the grade. You are being asked about how many good questions did you ask during the lessons. And I think a real educational process starts with the good questions. So I know that I'm avoiding answers in this way, but I would like to put questions that can be analyzed while reflecting this transitional period. But I think the questions in this case are even more important than the answers. We have many answers, but not all of them are satisfying, and not all of them are accepted by the different groups. So the first question would be related with what was already said by both Luisa and Juozas. It concerns the state of a transformation. Is it finished process or still a continuous process? Of course, like our countries, and I mean now more like our region in the Baltics, but and also a broader look that it looked as we were like really success stories. We managed the transformation to both market economy to democracy. We entered, as Luisa said, European Union, and it looked like as the final destination, and finally we can relax. But this relaxation can be really mistaken, because it reminds really about the trap about which the Yale historian Timothy Snyder was speaking while addressing the issue of politics of inevitability. That somehow history has some kind of predestined pattern, and we can predict how it will develop. And if we know this pattern, then it means we can do nothing, or actually we can relax, just sit down and look how things develop, because it doesn't matter what we do, everything will finish well. Yeah, so it looked for a while that, yeah, everything finished well, but now we see that, for example, Hungary, according to the Freedom House, was once counted as a consolidated democracy, and now it's a hybrid regime or a transitional regime. And here also it's a very important question. If we speak about that it's possible to slide backwards, do we really slide backwards into some kind of illiberal regimes or authoritarian regimes that we know from the history, or something new is being born? I mean, like for example, there is a book by John Keane, which is called The New Despotism, which actually shows that history in this way might be not that helpful, because not the old things are coming back, but some new hybrid authoritarian regimes are being born. But anyway, I think it's very important to discuss this question about the continuing transition, because it speaks about, as I said, the citizens' responsibility. And in this case, even I remember the building of the European Parliament, which in a way remembers this Tower of Babel, which can be also interpreted in many ways. I know that in the 19th century, some Jewish rabbis interpreted the story of the building of Tower of Babel as a symbol of authoritarianism, of totalitarianism, where all the people are being put to speak one language to build a huge tower, and which means that their subjugation. But in this, on the other hand, you can also interpret this story as the building is never finished. You are the one who should bring the next brick, and if you will do not, then it might collapse. So we have to address this. The next question is would be about how did the hopes at the beginning of the transformation shaped the expectations of the people, and later the evaluation of the transformation process, because these expectations reflect on the nature of belonging, for example, to the nation, ethnic nationalism versus civic patriotism, attitudes and ideas towards Europe and European integration, because there were also different and still are different attitudes Europe that we should catch up as a cradle of civilization, as the kind of standard bearer of our ideals. But on the other hand, there are also attitudes which look at Europe as a threat to the ethnic culture and so on. For example, those hopes, those attitudes, they were also changing, and this change also helps us to reflect on the contemporary state of a society and also on the past. The next question would be about the traumas, and how did the traumas inflicted by, let's say, both totalitarian regimes, because, for example, Lithuania was occupied both by Nazi and the communist powers. We had a terrible Holocaust, then we had mass deportations to Siberia, and etc. But also later on, like repression, censorship, and the other things, which means we didn't start the transition period from the empty page. We started being traumatized, and this story of transition is two-way street. On the one hand, it's a story of society being healed from those traumas, because the people were able to start speak freely about what they experienced, to tell their stories without fearing repressions and etc. But on the other hand, these traumas, they shaped this transformation period. And for example, now I think there's an open question. Nordic states, they say that trust between people and also towards institutions, democratic institutions, is their gold. So they value it a lot. And we, if we look at the statistics, I mean, Lithuania now, we are behind them. So the question is also, did those traumas influence the lack of trust between people? Because we know that the connective tissue of the society was broken at that time. So we had to rebuild, and it takes time and it takes challenges. The next question was inspired by another Polish author, at this time Ryszard Kapuscinski, and in his book, Christ with the machine rifle on the shoulder, he writes, "People who write history pay too much attention to its moments which widely and loudly heard about, and less often address the periods of silence. They lack the intuition which is so common to every mother when she hears that her child's room suddenly became silent. Mother knows that silence means something bad, that something is hidden behind it. She runs to check because feels that something bad is in the air. Silence means the same in history and politics." So he says, too often we concentrate on the things that are already known. So we repeat, we discuss, and so on. But we should look at the voices probably that were unheard before, that for the narratives that are not included, so to say, in the grand narrative. So when discussing the period of transformation, we must pay attention not to only the voices which are heard most often, but also listen to those who kept silence or were silenced. Only in this way we can understand why some people might have grievances, disappointing attitudes towards the period of transformation. And this does not mean that they are against independence, democracy, Western orientation. It can simply mean that they feel that the big promises and hopes which they had at the beginning were not delivered or fulfilled, or they still feel voiceless, that they kind of can speak, but they are not included. And yes, I will try to finish soon. And the next question is also how those small narratives, let's say by different groups, coexist or conflict with the bigger narrative of that also we tell, because at the beginning of transformation, of course, we had the freedom to tell the national narrative and so on. So this big one, but then we can divide it in the parts and look for smaller and smaller narratives. For example, about the national minorities in Lithuania. How do they perceive transformation? Russian speakers from being the representatives of the dominant group to becoming a small national minority in the Lithuania dominated by Lithuanians, and etc. So in this way, you can understand the attitudes the people have. And we can go even smaller. For example, now I'm in a commission to award scholarship for the investigative journalism. And one of the proposals that came is about investigating LGBT people among national minorities, Russian speakers and Polish speakers. And it's very important because they are part in a group that is or might suffer from discrimination, but in this group, which itself suffered discrimination today, they are also discriminated. So it's like a double trauma, double challenge. And the next naturally question is, do we still need big narratives at all? Or it's time to kind of destroy those big narratives and give freedom to all these small narratives. But then how can we speak if all these small narratives will not become kind of competitive, even conflicting arena, that competitive victimhood and etc. So I will finish with the statement by my favorite author, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who spoke about 2 levels that we have to concentrate while creating a working democracy. He said one level is the social contract, which we address quite often, but the other level is social covenant. The one establishes the state, the other establishes the society. And it's we need them both. It doesn't mean, if I now stress more the social level, doesn't mean that we do not need state anymore. But as Michael Żontowski, the former advisor to the president of Czech Republic, Václav Havel, once told me during the interview, he said, we were able quite quickly to establish democratic institutions, but we didn't expect that it will take so long to educate democratic people, that the values important to democracy wouldn't be just enshrined somewhere in the documents, constitution, and so on, but that they would become part of our hearts, part of our souls. And that's why speaking about transition, analyzing it in an educational arena is very important, because it's about the healthcare of our democracies. So I will just read this sentence, and that's gonna be my last sentence in these 10 minutes. So Jonathan Sacks says, social contract creates a state. Social covenant creates a society. Social contract is about power and how it is to be handled within a political framework. Social covenant is about how people live together despite their differences. Social contract is about government. Social covenant is about coexistence. Social contract is about laws and their enforcement. Social covenant is about the values we share. Social contract is about the use of potentially coercive force. Social covenant is about moral commitments, the values we share, and the ideals that inspire us to work together for the sake of common good. So ideals, and how do we define a common good? Because it is very important, this ideals and common good, because too often we, I think, define ourselves by some kind of fixed attributes: religion, language we speak, ethnicity, and etc. But in this covenant model, what is really important, you are what you do, not like the language you use. What do you speak? How do you relate with the people? How do you build the bridges? And so on. So all this story of transformation in this way is continuing, because responsibility is in our hands. We create, we make this social tissue of the society, or either on the other hand, we destroy it. This is also can be, what can be done can also be unfortunately undone. So thank you.
There have been so many proposals for research questions, and wish we had three-day conference because I have so many questions to you, and I'd like to maybe keep them for later in case we have some time remaining, just to elaborate on a few ideas. So maybe Lisa and Juozas, do you have some comment for a minute on top of what Donatas talked? Or we can move on.
I can say, I have to say thank you to Donatas because he gave me a lot of ideas to talk about. I had an idea what I'm going to talk about, but by listening to you, I came up with a bunch of ideas just right on the spot. So you're very inspiring. Thank you for that.
Maybe just to give a quick comment as well, if you would allow me to. Absolutely seconding what Juozas said. And I think, I mean, I'm trying also to think, how can we be of use for those who are listening to us? Because I think that's a bunch of people who might be both teachers, but also, you know, practitioners of history and civic education, but also maybe think tankers. So Donatas basically opened the scope like this. So I'm wondering what would be a way forward for us to try to a little bit narrow it down, maybe talk about examples and cases and good and bad practice, whatever, out of how to deal practically with the topic of historical memory of transition so that we move forward. Because I think the one thing that becomes clear to all of us is that Central Eastern Europe specifically is having this kind of triple challenge. In a way, we have to deal with the past of, as Donata said, two totalitarian regimes, so both the Nazi regime, but also the communist. We have to deal with all the traumas of transition, and we're also facing all the contemporary challenges to democracy: artificial intelligence, social networks, anonymity, terrorism, you name it. But at the same time, how do we make this from a position of owning our agency so that we don't put ourselves in a position of the victims, but actually of those who own their fate? So in a way, I'm speaking to a conversation we had before we started and to what Juozas said. You know, how do we gain that self-efficacy as citizens of the regions, that our fate is in our hands? And I think the comparison Juozas gave in the beginning between the American society and our societies is like the United States were built on a totally different premise. The state there was built on in a totally different logic based compared to European states. So in a way, how do we overcome that, and how do we help young people? Because I think that's what the majority of us are invested in, taking the lessons of history, building on them, and having the sense of self-efficacy and becoming sort of active citizens and actively shaping their own own fates and own future.
Thank you very much. Mr. Juozas, I will put you on track. I will lead you in a tunnel to a transnational perspective, of course, specifically, and how's the 90s seen by Lithuanian diaspora, and how different is that from the local Lithuanian perspective from your own experience? Could you briefly elaborate on that, and we'll jump to some other specific questions, okay?
Okay, so thank you so much. I have a list, so good. Okay, let's start. How about, you mean the local American diaspora, how they see the transition? And I have to say, a local American Lithuanian diaspora helped Lithuania enormously, and especially those Lithuanians who were United States citizens, because you're only effective politically as long as you are a citizen of that country. You only can address a senator if you are an American citizen. Those Lithuanians who refused to become American citizens, they maintain Lithuanian culture, tradition, but their voices didn't go to Washington, D.C. Their voices, you were not part of an election. So those Lithuanians who accepted American citizenship. They participated in American political lives. They participated in elections. They wrote letters to senators. Their voices were heard, and they kind of passed that message to United States senators, like, don't forget a small country in Eastern Europe, which was occupied. And because of these active Lithuanian Americans, that's why I say American Lithuanians, mean they kept United States senators talking about Lithuania, raising the question about their occupation. So I would say this was the way, because it was the same thing with me when I moved to America, and I wanted to become part of America. I didn't want to just to live in America. I didn't want to be between Lithuanians. I wanted to absorb the country, and I wanted to make that country mine, and I wanted to make myself part of that country, not just to go take something and leave it. I wanted to give to that country, and the only way to give and to take, you have to be very active participant politically and as a person. And now let's say I would call myself, I was an immigrant because I moved to the United States on my free will. But people in 1940s and 50s, they were refugees who escaped the Soviets. And the only goal these refugees had for 50 years of occupation to reestablish what they lost, to reestablish Lithuanian independence, to regain by pressing United States senators, by writing letters to the president, by participating in demonstrations, and so on. And when Lithuania regained its independence, these people, refugees, who fought for 50 years, they felt our mission is done. That's it, Lithuania is free, nothing more to do. Now we have to enjoy, relax, and party. And let's say, and their opinion and their views to us, to immigrants who immigrated to America in 90s, in 2000, they looked at us like, you guys, we left Lithuania because we had to leave, because it was stretching our lives. And you guys left Lithuania when it's free. Now you have to build, now you have to help, and you leaving. So they looked down on us. They didn't accept us so with open arms. We have to kind of prove themselves and them, like, we're worthy, please accept us. We're Lithuanians, but we're not bad people who just looking for easy way out. And let's say, if you ask regular Americans, they're going to say, we defeated the Soviets. If you ask Lithuanian Americans, they say, we defeated the Soviets. So you're going to get almost the same answer, but it's totally different meaning, because Americans don't think like Lithuania defeated Soviets. America thinks Americans defeated Soviets, but Lithuanians, we all have, like, we're claiming that victory over Soviets. And you have to be very careful about it, like who you're talking to and what does it mean, even if you're using the same language. Do I have more time to do it, or I can elaborate?
Just briefly.
Just briefly, okay. A transition period. Transition period, let's say, in Lithuanian community, transition period was over as soon as Lithuania regained its independence. That's it. Right now, Lithuania free, you just enjoy, no more deep problems, nothing much to work out, just make your country beautiful, maintain Lithuanian culture, history, heritage, and everything is fine. No kind of new ways of do something or go to the West, because I think Lithuanian community in the United States, they don't see Lithuania as part of the EU mentally. We live in Europe, but we're Lithuanians as an independent state with our borders, with our laws, with our foreign policy. And when you're trying to explain, like, we're now part of a different union, and by being part of a different union, you gain something and you lose something. That's kind of leads to feel like, what do you mean losing? I said, when you're part of a union, you have to give up some of your independence, because that's how union works. And that's kind of very hard for them to understand. So said, we fought for 50 years because you guys give away some part of your independence. It's kind of hard to explain, and it's life. It's just it means like refugees, they think the goal is accomplished, and Lithuanians today see the goal is go ahead, not to stop, not to enjoy, but to work hard to a future where it leads. That's it.
Thank you very much, Juozi. And I'd like to maybe just to tell the listeners that our second president after gaining independence was American Lithuanian, and the impact was very huge indeed. But just maybe, Juozi, just to add some another perspective, maybe when you were in the United States, were there any analogies in the narratives of other American national communities? Let's say, have you had a touch with others like Latvians or Estonians or Poles? Have you had a touch with other national communities that also had a similar narrative? Could you share a little bit about that?
I really was looking to meet any Latvians or any Estonians, but it looks like Latvians and Estonians, they very close communities. And I think Lithuanian community is one of the biggest, especially in Chicago in Midwest. I haven't heard about Latvian community in the Midwest. I haven't heard about Estonian community in the Midwest. They kind of located maybe a little bit in the East Coast. But I heard a lot about Polish community. The Polish community is a huge community in the United States, and especially in Chicagoland, in North and West. And they really have a very big political power over local senators. Local senators, let's say from Illinois, there are 2 senators, they kind of pay attention. They pay attention to Polish community because it's a big amount of people. It's a big amount of people who participating in elections. So if you want to be elected, you cannot avoid a Polish community. Lithuanian community is much smaller, but still, but I was part of any meetings, gatherings where United States senators from Illinois were attending Lithuanian celebrations, Lithuanian kind of gatherings, because they said, you are part of American community. So I know it's a very strong Jewish community. They don't call themselves Israelis community. They call us Jewish community, which really strong, and Jewish community really strong in New York and Philadelphia, and they really strong in north of Chicago, and they very involved in politics, in the local politics, in a state politics, in country's politics, and in foreign policies. So they contribute, they send money, they have different programs. So we, like Lithuanian community, only can learn how to be part of it. And especially, let's talk about, remember, when Lithuanian person moves or goes to America, like me, I had to start from scratch. I even didn't have a place to live. I didn't have a job. And basically you being on your own, nobody helps you, but nobody helps you not because they don't want to help, but because Lithuanians are very kind of individualistic. And when I met some people from Jewish community, they say, look at you Lithuanians, you're very proud of your churches, yes? But when a person moves to America, where does he go? To a church? No, he needs a place to sleep, he needs a place to eat, he needs some clothing, he needs some money, he needs some advice, he needs a job. And you guys don't provide that. You only say, oh, we have a church. Jewish community, they do the totally opposite. They have a foundation. And they help that person to find a job. They help person with housing, with food, with finding a job, and so on. So they are more helping to each other than than we are in America, let's say.
So to summarize, I believe that they also facilitated the transition period in their native countries, right? Very much as did Lithuanian diaspora, right? So I have very quick also question, maybe related to the same. Maybe is there Bulgarian diaspora maybe active in the I don't know, national Bulgarian life, and how did they see the transition period? Is there any I don't know, discourse on that? Is there a difference between Bulgarian diaspora and local Bulgarian diaspora towards the transition period? Is there any difference in there?
So this is not a question that I have like extensively researched, so I can give anecdotal examples maybe, so that I don't spread false news here. So just like Joza said, there is the diaspora Bulgarians who left the country because of being in exile because of the communist regime. And these were the ones who were really trying to help one way or another, same way as also Joseph gave an example, the consolidation of democracy here. So trying to support, to rally for support from within the United States, political support, but also, of course, among other European countries. So that's the old diaspora Bulgarian. And there is a big Bulgarian minority living in Chicago still to that date. I can give anecdotal examples of that, especially in relationship to their role in philanthropy, developing Bulgarian philanthropy after '89, building the local school of politics. You know that they were these schools of politics in the '90s that tried to support the multi-party system, for example. They're based on also again diaspora philanthropy. The American Bulgarian University was launched back in the days. So there are these anecdotal examples. I think the immigration of the '90s out of this country was very much an economic migration. So these were people who were really trying to meet ends with means and really went abroad because of the economy was collapsing over here, of course, pretty much. We have those examples that people don't believe. In '97, we had something like 2,000% inflation. So that's basically nothing's worth anything anymore. One day you have something, next day you basically don't have anything if you weren't smart enough to buy some US dollars the previous day. So in a way, that diaspora, I think, has always been looking at the country from outside and has been sort of disintegrating little by little. But there has been a new development. I think this also touches upon the topic of transition nicely, and the things we didn't deal with in transition. There were mass protests, for those of you who follow Bulgaria a little bit, last summer in the country that lasted like for months. And this is the first time I think we hear in the history of this country protests under the headline of rule of law. So these are predominantly, I think, young people who, because of COVID, came back to Bulgaria, and they had seen other standards when it comes to rule of law and accountability of politicians, and they want to see the same thing here. So they took it to the streets. I mean, that's generalization a little bit and a long story, cutting it short. But so basically, I think the sort of previous diasporas that were built over the '90s, they're kind of, I think, almost their relationship to Bulgaria is built on nostalgia. So nostalgia about history, nostalgia about the past. And they were also among the voters of a new anti-systemic party, a little bit like Zelensky's party or the Five Star Movement in Italy that is run by a TV show personality. So that type of diaspora voted for this new party, but that this doesn't have necessarily to do with, you know, helping rebuild democracy in the '90s.
I just remembered once my colleague came back from Australian Lithuanian school there, and he was visiting that school, and he told that if you want to make anthropological research, how Lithuanians spoke, what culture, traditions, language they used, if you want to investigate that, you need to go there. And there's absolutely interwar Lithuania. It's like absolutely different from the one that is currently here. So I'd like to approach the most important and most interesting here, the focus point, and the question to you, Ms. Luisa. But I'll start from the context. So the new generation, partly including myself perhaps, knows about the transition period only from the history classes and family stories, which often tend to romanticize the independence periods while neglecting to admit the struggles. The analysis carried out in the project under the name Transition Dialogue suggests that teaching about transition period lacks such approaches to learning like multiple perspectives, critical thinking, and inquiry-based learning. Could you please share more with us about what and how do we teach about the transition period in schools? What are the biggest challenges and what could be considered as good examples on teaching about the transition period?
Right, and thank you for that. So just to expand a little bit the context of the project, as you said, it's called Transition Dialogue, and it builds on the experience of a network of organizations and actors from Central and Eastern Europe, so obviously those who had to deal with the political transition of the 90s, including colleagues from Germany. So what we have done over the past, so we're there as a network since 2016, if I'm not mistaken. The concrete idea for us to get together was basically the 25th anniversary since the fall of the Berlin Wall in 2014. So it was already at that time that we started sensing that transition is becoming a historical period, so it's becoming historicized, but also becoming slightly politicized. And because it becomes politicized, it also leads to polarizations in society. So little by little, we had the different activities, obviously exchange of practitioners, because that's who were a part of the network. But at some point we said, you know what, since this period is becoming history and it's taught, similar to communism, you either learn about it from history books or from the direct experiences of your family. We wanted to see what is in the textbooks specifically on the period of transition. And so this took us on an endeavor to compare textbooks from 7 countries, this being Germany, Lithuania, Croatia, Bulgaria, Poland, Russia, and Ukraine. So you can imagine that that's pretty exhaustive examples. And those of you who are history teachers know that there are curricula and dozens of textbooks, and in larger countries like Russia, even more. No, I mean, Russia is not a good example. There aren't too many textbooks, history textbooks, but probably in Germany there are a lot. So it was really an interesting endeavor to do. And what we wanted to figure out is exactly that. First of all, what is specifically taught in the history books? Is there a focus on events? Is there a focus on chronology? Is there a focus on larger socioeconomic tendencies and trends? And what is the specific focus? So what do the textbooks narrowly look at, but also what is left out? And the purpose at the end of the day is not only to have this comparative text, but then of the textbooks, but then also to make concrete proposals to how exactly cover those gaps in the textbooks. And I think it won't be coming as a surprise to you that those things that are omitted are usually the painful bits, so those that are related to trauma, or those topics that are mostly controversial in society. So everyone is shying away. So it's a pretty extensive text, so I'm not going to be able to obviously cover a lot here, but the purpose, I think, of this conversation is just to spark your interest, so we get to have you among the readers of that handbook. But so among the findings are, first of all, that there is no in-depth dealing with either political or social changes in neither of the societies. The focus is really a lot on the chronology. So that's what happened on November the 9th. That's what happened on November the 10th. That's what happened on January 13th, 91, et cetera, et cetera. So the chronology is really the backbone of history, of history telling in the textbooks. So it's the focus much more on dates, facts, figures, events, but there is no attempt at basically looking at the larger picture. So it's a chain of events, and it's not necessarily there. Everyone is shying away from the complexity of transition the way it was. Different countries obviously have different challenges in dealing with that. But one common theme is that everyone is focusing on the national perspectives. And this is something that is running through the region here. So in Eastern Europe, we somehow don't have the sense of having this family loving it, hating it, doesn't matter. We don't have that sense. So in Western European history, in a way, or in the way history is taught in the Western and northern part of Europe, there is the sense of belonging to a larger family. Over here is like we're looking at our specific national history, and we don't find a way of placing it on the larger picture of Eastern European history. As I said, controversies are avoided. This is usually when there is more than just one perspective on the issue, and usually when that's a rather traumatic experience for the local societies. In some countries, this is questions of early nationalism of the 90s, for example, and the fact that some of the revolutions were really nationalist in their nature, but then also what were the consequences of that. Minority issues as well in those countries specifically that did or do have minorities. Bulgaria is one of them. So there is hardly talk about how we dealt with this shameful chapter of the history of expelling more than 600,000 ethnic Turks out of Bulgaria in the 80s to Turkey. Hardly, and there is, so there, the way we summarize this is that there is a lack of multi-perspectivity. So there is the attempt to order things in dates, facts, figures, events, but there is no attempt at really trying to go further down in depth to understand what actually happened. There is quite often this how do I call this? So in a way, neither of the textbooks, but also the curricula, tries to bring in controversies in the teaching. So you have it either white or black. You also kind of, just as usually happens in history teaching is on the side of the winners. So it's the highlights are obviously about regaining independence, rebuilding democracies, joining the European Union, joining NATO, having market economies. But the downside of that, basically, all the lost jobs, the negative sides of privatization. This is especially in the German case. So these are all things that are basically missing. Another thing of which all history teachers would complain is the fact that there isn't really enough time to unfold that. And I think this is also part of the reason why it all remains on the surface. Not to mention lack of work with all the resources that would be at hand, because in every family there is a living experience of transition. But so work with eyewitnesses, for example, is not really something that is encouraged. So I think at the end of the day, what we're going to try to do with this handbook is, as I said, based on the comparison, is not only to offer both national but also transnational lesson units that try to fill those specific gaps, but also to try to offer a methodological part of the textbook that focuses specifically on things like how do you deal with controversies? How do you try to combine, for example, a historical fact with the personal experience that is exactly the opposite of that historical fact? Because this is at the end of the day that matters, because history, just like politics, just like everything else, is not only about the facts, but is also about the emotions. And so if your personal experience is different to the main narrative or to the facts don't play a role for you, for your personal story. And this is also what you put forward. Another thing that we're going to try to look into in the methodological bit is also the challenge when it comes to teachers who have lived through transition. We have seen the same challenge in teachers who have lived through communism, that it's kind of, you need to be slightly schizophrenic in the classroom. You have our personal stories, you have our personal experiences, but you need to put something else forward in class. So at the end of the day, it's really about trying to teach young people the sort of the multi-perspectivity and the different dimensions of history, the critical thinking, the ability to deal with controversies in the classroom and to make arguments in a face-saving manner, rather than really stick to the curriculum that is kind of almost like those neighborhoods where you have row houses. So it's the facts, it's the figures, and it's the chronology, and that's it. Because this works well, but what doesn't work well is really the other one, putting it in the larger context, looking at the pan-European example and experience. And I think there is a lot of added value in talking about this in a comparative context, because this is, I think, also part of the granting agency to citizens and to young people. Because once you stop focusing only on your own history, but you see that there were also others like you in the region that went through a similar experience. But that there are also examples of people who were, had been self-empowered and took to the streets, did what it takes to do, with all the humility, etc. I think this is what it comes to and what it boils down to. And I think we're going to be seeing more of that as we go, because the more historical the transition period is becoming, I think the more that will be in the public discourse, but also in the becoming a polarizing topic. Just like being pro and anti-communist was like a real dividing line for elections in our countries. I think that's a transition has the potential of being one of that, because at least where I come from, but also in some of the countries where we did the comparison, there is this talk already of the winners and the losers of transition. But there is also the attempt at trying to change the transition history. So some of the new leaders like Poland's Kaczynski, for example, is trying to rewrite the history of Poland's 90s. So Lech Walesa is now seen as a different figure, I think, compared to what he actually tried to do in society. And I think the last thing that I can share with everyone on the panel and the audience is again as an example of how this topic is becoming important. Germany is about to build a center on history of transition, German unity. So they call it the European History of Transition and German Unity. And the center is going to be based somewhere in Eastern Germany, and it's going to look at research focusing on transition, cultural practice, and then a specific focus on exchange of practical work done in the field of history and civic education, focusing on the transition. So that's, I think, a way of also highlighting the fact that Germany also at the institutional level figures out that this is a very important topic, but I think this is also important for our conversation here today.
Thank you very much, Lisa. We also have a question from the audience, and that we partly addressed right now. So I'll read the question, or you can see yourself this question on the right side, right? So could you describe specific challenges when teaching transition in your countries? How do you reflect on different, possibly conflicting national narratives in the region? And how do you include minority narratives, and how challenging is it? Thank you, Nadia Seifert from Free University of Berlin. So I can't even be quiet and not share my experience, since I teach in the National Minorities School in Russian school. And actually, there is interesting conflicting narrative in, for example, the end of the Second World War. So for what is a victory for one side, let's say for Russian identity, and for Lithuanian Russian identity for sure. And on the other side, for Lithuanians, is a loss, is an occupation, right? So we are actually not directly guided on how to teach those sensitive questions. And only due to the fact that I've been reading a lot of literature, my master thesis was closely related to that, we managed to build those balanced arguments, like, oh, all right, so to my opinion, it was a victory. However, on the other side, we have to recognize that it has its limitations, like a smaller nation suffered from Stalin's occupation, let's say, right? So, and there is another conflicting moment, let's say information bubble, that let's say titular groups, dominant groups in the society, let's say majorities and minorities. So often is the case that we get different information on our news, right? So, but what's your stand on this question? How do we include minority narratives, and how challenging is it? What's your experience on that, or perspective on that?
I feel tempted to continue speaking, but maybe that's not very polite.
I believe it's okay.
And I saw Donatas went to grab a book that he, I think, wants to share with us. But I'll just make a very quick remark and just maybe give a short example. As I just told you, we have the example in Bulgaria of the Turkish ethnic minority, which is something around 10% of the minority. It's a traditional minority out of the Ottoman times. So Bulgaria was part of the Ottoman Empire for quite some time. And so as an attempt to clinch the power, the communist regime did a forceful renaming of the Bulgarian Turks in the 80s. They tried to paint them as local terrorists that were in touch with Turkish government, that they were trying to overthrow the regime, whatever. And that they forcefully made them change their names into Bulgarian names. And they went around the country with a small book like this one. And in the book, there were some names. These were Bulgarian names that people were offered, so they were supposed to change their names. And people didn't want to do that, of course. So there was a forceful renaming process. But since this backlash, Bulgaria opened the border to Turkey. And as I said, 600,000 people basically on foot left the country to Turkey. The majority of them came back after 89 because Turkey simply wasn't their homeland. Even though they had a cultural heritage from the Ottoman time. And so this chapter is a chapter that has been not dealt with in history. Part of the political consensus of the 90s was to allow a party to emerge that is actually representing this ethnic minority. But on paper, it says it doesn't, because the constitution forbids for parties to be based on an ethnic or religious ground. And so part of this kind of very shaky consensus of the 90s says also this is a topic we don't talk about. We just don't talk about this. And a couple of years ago, we took a young artist to a village to the south of Bulgaria, in a village that was depopulated during this so-called revival process, the forceful exodus of the Bulgarian Turks. And this village was full of old stone houses that were already demolished by time. So what this young artist did was to make an artistic installation. Each of the houses represented a bit of the history of the Turkish minority and how they were forced to leave the country. And we took kids from all over the country there to experience that. So the majority of the kids, not to say all of them, said they had never heard about this history. In the history books that we took as an example, that were the most prominent history books, this period of our history was covered in 2 sentences, basically, explaining nothing about it. At the same time, you would have young people there saying, well, we did that with them, but they also did that with us under the Ottoman Empire. So long story short, we spent with young people there at the time, not only, sort of living the example of that historical period through the installation, but also had, work group, and we had a couple of historians giving the whole context so that it gets, they get the full picture. It takes a lot of unpacking. So I think tackling these issues is really not a matter. So we should be having patience, I think, both with the teachers for the fact that they lack the methodological skills. So no teacher would actually do what we do as a civil society organization, taking kids at a place like that, organizing an installation, working with an artist. So it's that one thing. The second thing is really supporting teachers in learning how to work themselves with that. So how to bring in these diverse viewpoints in one place. And then I think that the other way, especially for those of us who are from the civil society sector, it is really about trusting that you can work with history teachers, and you can work also with ministries of education, you can work with also other history experts. Because I think history teachers these days are so overwhelmed by all the administrative work that they need to do that they're very often happy about good ideas coming from civil society sector. So I can only encourage colleagues in the room to really look around. There are a bunch of good practice examples out there how to do that. There are a bunch of methodologies, both in Europe, but also abroad. Users would know that Facing History in Ourselves, a lovely platform in the US that helps teachers really deal with historical topics in a meaningful way.
I have so much temptation to open new doors to their new discussions, but I'll try to maybe finalize the very last question. Like, what advice or what qualities do you think the teacher, the citizenship education teacher or history teacher or any other teacher who talks about transition period, what qualities he's supposed to have or demonstrate? Or would you have any advice to him how to deal with this narrative? Could you think for a moment and share your last words? We have 3 minutes left. Josie.
I can start. Like living in America, I was interested to Americans because I was different. And I think Lithuania, and especially teaching kids, I don't know about Lithuanian too much right now, but like in general, if you ask American Lithuanian, are they happy to be Lithuanian? They can say yes, because they different from regular Americans. So I think just because we're striving to be part of a Western culture, Western democratical system, it doesn't mean we have to renounce our history. We have to renounce our identity or heritage. It means the West is interesting to us because they're different. That's the same. We could be interesting to the West because we're different. So the main point, not to renounce ourselves, not to feel bad about being different, but to be happy about being different and share these differences, maintaining your culture, maintaining your heritage, maintaining your history, and not to renouncing your language. Like, it's no like in America, American Lithuanians, they have Lithuanian days in the regular high schools. And Americans like, oh, you Lithuanian descent, what's that flag? And they kind of proudly announce themselves, yes, I'm Lithuanian by my parents, or I was born in Lithuania. And they happy Lithuanians, and these Lithuanian Americans, they don't want to leave America. They want to come, some of them even want to go to Lithuania. But so many, I think, young Lithuanians, they want to get out of Lithuania because they think over there is better. Their way of life is nicer. I think we have to teach kids to love our country in a way Western countries love themselves. We victimizing ourselves. We feel sorry too much about ourselves. And that reflects on our kids. They kind of start to feel the same way. Like, I'm going to be happy if I move out. I felt the same way a little bit before I moved to America. And I regained my Lithuanianship, basically. I became a happier Lithuanian living abroad. And I became more patriotic. Kids used to call me Mr. Vilkas, and I was very proud of that because I said, I want to keep my Lithuanian name in America because it sounds different. It sounds kind of attractive. So being different is being attractive. And that's what we need to encourage our kids. Being different, being attractive, being curious about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Josie. Donati, 2 sentences, 1 tip for a teacher. What he's supposed to demonstrate?
Impossible. I think very important things were said by Luisa, and I would like to say that the teachers shouldn't be afraid of those traumas and controversial issues that are being avoided in the textbooks, but they also at the same time have to search for subtle ways to address those issues, not like head on with the hammer that, you know, it's this and that, and I will tell you. Dialogue, discussion is very important, and even analyzing, not starting with the presentation of this or that narrative, but starting with the discussion why certain narratives are absent or were absent for a long time. how did it happen? Because yeah, when after 90s, after your narrative was suppressed for a long time, you come up, you finally can tell your story, and then someone comes and tells, look, you have to adjust this narrative a bit. Of course, this defensive reaction sometimes comes up because you, again, you feel like you are being regulated and etc. But it is very important not to be afraid to understand that the dialogue doesn't start with the tongue. It also includes ears to listen to the other. And this listening, I think we should start not from this meta level where the different narratives, big narratives clash. Then, of course, it's very easy to say that it's a zero-sum game when either my narrative prevails or your narrative prevails. I think here, why I came to my bookshelf to take a few books, literature comes into help a lot because it lowers down and helps us to look to the world through the eyes of a different person. And Amos Oz, who is actually, whose father was living in Vilnius, in an old town, that's why I quote him. He wrote in his Tale of Love and Darkness that literature is not about looking through the window to see what's happening in the bedroom of my neighbor, to like gossip, find some funny details, and etc. It's trying to look to the world through the prism of a different person. And I'm very happy today that in Lithuania we have more and more books that speak up, present those narratives that were absent. For example, here is the one book by Tadeusz Konvický, a Polish author, who was born in near Vilnius, and this book, Roist, it tells the story of a Polish partisans at the end of the Second World War fighting the occupants. But of course, they are fighting in the belief that Vilnius will be theirs. And you know, we have this conflict with Poles still sometimes about like interwar period. We treat as Vilnius is occupied. They say that it was this rightful union with the rest of Poland and etc. But this book helps to look through the eyes of an ordinary young guy who went into the forest, and to understand his motivation, his despair afterwards when he understood that the battle will not be won. Or, for example, another book by Itzhok Rudashevsky, it's Vilnius Ghetto Diaries, in which this young boy who was like a teenager writes in the 1941 on the 21st of June that he looks at the retreating Red Army and is certain that it will win and it will come back to Lithuania. And of course, it's like at that time we were hoping that the other occupant, the brown occupant, maybe would be better and we will be able to reestablish independence, or they had different beliefs. But this, reading the diary of a boy, helps to understand that there were other perspectives, that your perspective is not the only one. And I think that for the teacher it's important to instigate dialogue, which will not finish with, oh, we will all agree on the same narrative, but we will understand different perspective. We will understand why the other might think and evaluate history differently than us. And it's gonna be some kind of, let's say, agonistic agora. We will debate, we will even fight, but we will respect each other. We will treat each other with the respect. That's the most important.
It reminds me a teaching method, role play, right? Distributing different roles, investigating them, and then having a structured discussion. Thank you very much for participating today. I hope that listeners gain some additional ideas for further investigation. Wish everyone a great day and see you maybe in the future.
Great. Thank you very much for the invitation. Look forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.